Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. This is episode number 121 of the show, and I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This week I have 5 new LitRPG reviews just for you. Oddly enough, it was a very light week for new LitRPG releases. There are actually more LitRPG audiobooks that were released this week than new LitRPG ebooks. So interesting, shorter episode, hopefully, I think. But in new releases, I have for you 5 new reviews, including Virtual Heaven, a sci-fi soft LitRPG in the vein of Ready Player One. That's the title that the author put on that. Also, we'll be reviewing The Slayer, a LitRPG Saga, Aether Gate Online book number 1. Then it'll be Killstreak, book number 1, Respawn, an epic fantasy LitRPG. Then it'll be Loki's Daughter, the Opal Dungeon, a LitRPG novel, Tales of the Opal Dungeon, book number 1. And last but not least, it'll be Fortress of Shadows, a LitRPG, a GameLit adventure, Stonehaven League, book number 2. So there you go. I got 5 new reviews for you folks. Okay, we'll first begin our show, though, with LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with a quick bit of a couple stories from some LitRPG authors that are in Russia. We'll begin with Simon Vale from Magic Dome Books. They're the folks who do a lot of the translation from Russian LitRPG into English, and they translate and then publish it. Simon Vale is a very nice guy. He did some translation specifically for an answer from Michael Antonoff about whether there would be a 4th Dark Herbalist book, and I'm reading verbatim the translation that Simon Vale did for Michael Antonoff answering that question. I'm starting to write this week as soon as I finish editing the 3rd Reality Benders. I hope to finish it in October. For now, I'm not sure if the 4th book is going to be the series' final, but taking into account what I've already planned for it, probably not. Events in the book will most likely take place in reality, though there will be plenty of in-game stuff too. Perhaps some of you have already guessed who's been tombed in book 3. It wasn't Timothy. Anyways, after that, there will be a huge squabbling around the richest corporation of the planet. So I'm assuming in all that other stuff, he's referring to specifically the Dark Herbalist series, that he'll hopefully have that finished, the 4th book in that series, finished by October. He's currently editing the 3rd Reality Benders book. So hopefully we'll have something, see if he finishes in October. It's probably another 6 months-ish for translation work. So October, that's next year. It's too far. So March-ish, I guess, is the soonest we can expect book 4 in that particular series. That's unfortunate, but still better than not getting another book. We still have, of course, the books 2 and 3 of the Reality Bender series to look forward to reading first. Okay. Also, another bit of LitRPG news from Russia, or from another part of the country. Vasily Mihenko, author of The Way to Shaman, Galacticon, and the Dark Paladin series, recently posted about some of his plans for the future and some of the goals that he's accomplished actually this year. He's I think his day job is a project coordinator. That's right. He's a full-time. Well, he's a full-time author, and he has a full-time job and a family. So he's a very busy man. But as a project coordinator, part of his post was about him feeling guilty about not listing out his plans and organizing that way. So he just wrote a post in that regard. Some of the highlights are basically he's finished. He didn't finish the Galacticon book yet, book 2 in that series, like he wanted to, but hopefully we'll have it finished by the end of the year for, again, Galacticon book 2, which is, I think it's been like several years since book 1 came out, and people have always asked on and off about it. So it's nice to know that he is actually finishing that project, and hopefully by the end of the year he'll have the Russian version taken care of, and then of course translation work for that to be translated into English. He also said that he's already finished the 2nd Bard book, and it's going on to the translators, and he's working on book 3 with the other co-author. He also plans to write a new Barleona series called Invasion. It's set right after Way of the Shaman, book number 7, but it does not have Mahan as the main character. The story will follow up with both Mahan and Anastasia in that series, but again, there is an entirely different main character, so this would be like the third Barleona series. So it would be like the Way of the Shaman, it would be the Bard series, and now the Invasion would be the third series set in that universe. He is also planning a huge compilation book for the entire Way of the Shaman series, including supplementary material, including short stories, artwork, which we've been showing on and off on the podcast for the last few weeks, and short, a bunch of other things, like tiny little things to like make the fans feel special, and to kind of add added value to a compilation of the entire thing. So I look forward to that. He's also running a contest in Russia, trying to find like the best fantasy works from Russian short story fiction, or for Russian fantasy authors. But again, that's separate from the LitRPG side. But it is another thing he mentioned that he's getting busy on doing for his work. So that's it. That's all the news that I have for you this week, folks. There is nothing that is out now that I haven't already read currently in the LitRPG stuff. Again, slow release week. And there are some new LitRPG audiobooks, so we'll talk about that real quick. We had The Bathrobe Knight, volume number 3 is out by Charles Dean. That is out as an audiobook, finally. We also have book number 5 in the futuristic dungeon core series, The Province. We also have A Gamer's Wish by Tao Wang, out as an audiobook. It's an enjoyable LitRPG story for me. It's a urban fantasy and LitRPG game powers, so it was a nice little combination for me. I got a score of 7 and 10 from us for the ebook version of it. Entertaining, and of course for all the audiobooks we're talking about, or reviews in the show notes for the ebook versions if we have them. Also out now is We're Playing for Keeps, which is book 4 in the Alpha World series. It is out now. We gave that book ebook version a score of 7 out of 10, so enjoyable. Reality Benders book number 1 called Countdown is actually out. We were just talking about Michael Antomov's other series, but this as an audiobook is out currently. The first book in the series as an ebook got a score of 7 out of 10 from us. It was enjoyable, and I definitely been looking forward to reading book number 2. If you like the game, either the audiobook or the ebook, this kind of reminds me in that it's a very similar premise. This main character does other things, and it's a little more slice of life-ish until about 3/4 of the way into the story, in that it gets a little more focused on, like, directed towards like a specific goal and a specific enemy, but it's still very entertaining, very sci-fi-ish LitRPG kind of stuff. And there we go. Those are all the LitRPG stories that are coming out as audiobooks. We have that have come out, I should say, this week as audiobooks. In upcoming LitRPG, we have a few titles. One new edition, though, The Final Quest, Blood Feast book number 3, will be out June 22nd. So by the time some of you are actually watching this, this will actually already be out as the third and final book in that particular series. On June 26th, End of an Era, Project Chrysalis, book number 2 will be out. July the 1st, Apocalypse Gate number 2, Valley of Death will be out. On July the 10th, it'll be Restart, Level Up, book number 1, a new series from a Russian author translated into English. On July the 23rd, External Threat, Reality Benders, book number 2. And of course, on August the 7th, it'll be Death March, Euphoria Online, book number 1. And on August 30th, Raven of X, a LitRPG Saga, The Binding, book number 2. So there we go. That's it. Those are all the upcoming LitRPG, and we're going to move on to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we have 5 new LitRPG reviews. We're going to begin with Virtual Heaven, a sci-fi soft LitRPG in the vein of Ready Player One. That's the title. That's the actual author actually put. Written by Taylor Cole. Okay, this is a very easy review. Originally, this novel was published in November of 2017. The novel recently updated the title, adding the part that says a sci-fi, a soft LitRPG in the vein of Ready Player One. And it's a very easy review. It's neither LitRPG or particularly like Ready Player One. There's a VR system involved in this story, and there's some mind uploading, but that's kind of the extent of the connection to those other genres and stories. There's no RPG world. There's no RPG progression. The story may have other redeeming qualities. Like there's some decent reviews online for the story. There are. They were written in 2017. But for me, like this story, by adding LitRPG to it, by adding the reference to Ready Player One, it kind of seems like the author is trying to grab a different audience that he didn't write this story for potentially, and it kind of sets up expectations, whether they're intentional or not. That's I don't think it's gonna hit for readers, and for me especially, I was like, this is absolutely not lit RPG. You could probably call it cyber fiction, maybe cyberpunk something. Not GameLit, not lit RPG in any way, shape, or form. So for me, it gets a score of 4 out of 10 because it seems like it's adding the title just for sales. So there you go. That's Virtual Heaven, a sci-fi soft LitRPG. I'm not going to read the rest. With the score of 4 out of 10 because it's not actually LitRPG. So there you go. Okay. Next review, it's going to be The Slayer, a LitRPG Saga, Aether Gate Online, book number 1, written by Darren Holtberg Jr. It is 304 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Raise your blade. Take up the mantle of Slayer. Adam's life was anything but easy. With people at both school and home eager to make his life a living hell, the only place that he felt like himself was in the virtual world. At least there, he had some control. When the newest VR MMORPG title gets announced, Adam and his best friend Max are more than ready to dive in. Launch day arrives quickly, and Adam is plunged into a world that's more immersive than anything he's experienced before. Although the game offers a bevy of character choices, Adam quickly chooses the title of Slayer, a class that specializes in taking down stronger, more difficult opponents. Adam begins his adventure, but it's not long before he realizes that there's much more at stake when taking a life in this new game. The pain is very real, and death is permanent. Now trapped in a virtual world, Adam must take the mantle of Xander Darkblade and brave the dangers of the Aether Gate. It is a world of mighty creatures and fallen gods, a world with a powerful, familiar bond with their masters, granting them extraordinary powers that they wield with uncanny force. And as Adam and the others will soon discover, it is a world of secrets that have laid hidden for far too long. Welcome to Aether Gate Online. Okay, most of that description is true. Some of it is kind of exaggerated. I want to make a quick note here. This novel just came out recently, like as in the last day or so. There is a very early typo in the beginning of the story that shifts perspective a little bit, at least for me. The author says he's already submitted an update for it. There's a year change in the beginning of the story. It starts out in the year 2077, and then like the next subchapter, it actually skips to 2099, and it should say 2077. So the novel doesn't jump ahead 22 years like I thought it did, because I read it with the typo. It's just one of those day one mistakes that weren't corrected apparently in editing. Now, while in my correspondence with the author, because I saw it and I was like, hey, is this correct? And he's like, no, sorry, I'll make the change. He basically says that the typo doesn't change the story much. And I kind of disagree. A 22-year time jump is going to change your perspective on the story. It kind of shifts things forward. For me, it kind of changed the way I thought about the character, to be honest. For me, at least, it was a good way. Adam, the main character, in my eyes, because I saw that 22 and I was just slightly confused, and I kind of rationalized like, oh, that earlier part must have taken place when he was just a kid, and so he kind of has a crappy life. He has bad things that happen to him, and so 22 years later, when they say he's a senior, it's like, oh, he must be a senior in college, and so he's grown up. He's taken those problems and it's made him into the man he is today. And nope, I was just reading way too much into it because of a typo. So it is what it is. But however, that miss and of that typo kind of reflects one of the bigger issues I have with the story, is that there's a lot of mistakes in this thing. And there's a lot of problems with the story. A few of them were like technical writing issues, like the typo missing, some like bad tenses and some technical stuff. But there are other big things that, like issues with the game mechanics, issues with the characters, issues with the story itself. It had this story had so many problems for me that I just couldn't enjoy it. On the game mechanics side, I'll list them off. The majority of the problems that kind of drove me crazy when I was reading this how to deal with the math in the story and with the game mechanics. It's one of those things that occurs repeatedly in some stories or in our genre in particular, because when you start talking about RPG mechanics and RPG games, you're going to have the issues of like, some authors will create really solid, amazing game mechanics that are consistent, and some don't. And it's one of the things, like, if you're there are several types of writers, and that some authors and some writers have a very structured way of doing things. Like, they have an outline for every single thing in their story. It's all planned out in advance. And other authors write by the seat of their pants. They make it up as they're going along. Like, they might have an end goal, but everything in between the beginning and the end is complete made up as they're writing it. And that doesn't always work for a game system. It's like trying to code a game and just making up the rules as you go. Like, it can work out if you're really well detailed in your plan and you can organize your thoughts and you're good at math. But in the case of like a lot of LitRPG games that are, again, based on RPG game mechanics, if you're not planning out your game mechanics and your progression levels and like your skill trees and stuff, there are going to be issues with those game mechanics working out well in your story and feeling balanced. And that's what happens here a lot. For example, I have many examples in the actual full like review part of it, but I'll go over a couple of them. In the beginning of the story, when you first see the main character's character sheets, everything looks pretty standard. Like, you have health, you have a health bar with like a health pool, you have an energy bar with like an energy pool that the main character, I assumed, fueled like his special abilities, like a stamina bar, basically, but it's called energy. Then you have your normal stats, your skills, your abilities. Okay, pretty normal stuff, right? Except the entire energy pool mechanic that's supposed to like fuel special abilities, it literally disappears from the story. Like, it's there in the beginning, the first character sheet. The second character sheet you see at about level 7, it's gone. Like, the entire thing is gone. And it kind of feels like it was something that the author had maybe planned originally, and then he just didn't want to deal with the math and deal with like the story consequences of like having a limiting factor on the cool skills and abilities he tries to write. And so he just like left it off, but he forgot to go back and change it. And it's kind of reflected in the way he describes the special abilities of the main character. He calls them skills. They're more like abilities though, in that they, special combat abilities, special like magic abilities. But because they don't have a cost associated with them, whether it's mana or stamina or energy, whatever, what ends up happening in this particular story is that those abilities get used again and again and again. They're essentially spammed, and they're overpowered because they're used as the default setting. Like, oh, my magical wand-waving power of killing the monster, even if he's like 20 levels ahead of me. And this literally does happen sometime in the story, and that's a separate issue. But that the main character and the other characters in the story are often fighting like enemies that are much more powerful than them, but they always win. I'll get into that a little bit, but that's one of those things that's kind of associated with, like, they're able to win because this other game mechanic isn't balanced. It doesn't make sense, and it doesn't have a limiting factor, even though it was designed originally for it. It just was forgotten to be erased entirely from the entire story. Another big issue for me was that it kind of feels like a lot of the powers that the main character actually gets are just kind of made up as he's writing, and that's like kind of maybe the case, and that's a writer's choice. I'm not criticizing the choice of doing it. What I personally am criticizing or we're talking about is that for me it felt like it didn't balance out in a game world that didn't have logical sense. Like, it doesn't have structure, and that for me was one of the things I love about LitRPG, is that the rules make sense. They're applied consistently. It's like when I play a video game, I know the structure, and part of the fun is like, seeing the boundaries of the structure and figuring out exploits of the structure, but as it's described, not as I'm making it up as I go. That kind of conceptualization of a story feels very much more fantasy oriented, and not as much based in a grounded computer game mechanic system. You know what I mean? Additionally, there's just like bad math here. Like, there really is. Like, it's established very early in the story that as the main character levels, he gets 2 stat points to distribute to whatever he wants as he levels. So at level 7, which is the second time you see a character sheet, the main character should have an additional like 14 stat points. 2 times 7, easy math, right? Yet the main character has an additional 21 distributed. I don't know. I'm not sure where that other 7 comes from. Like, some of it comes from equipment. It does. Like, he gets a weapon that has a +2 to strength. But like the rest of those numbers, they just magically appeared. There's no explanation for them. And it's one of those things like, oh, the math is not this thing. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those like things in a story like I'm seeing as a real like, oh, math is not this, maybe this author's thing that he's focusing on the most. And it also like doesn't explain where they came from. Like, it could come from equipment. It really could. It could come from like special abilities that he learned. It's just not explained. And that's kind of issue with it. I don't have an issue with like inflated math numbers or inflated damage numbers, inflated abilities. As long as you're explaining it to me and it feels logical and it feels like it fits into this world you've created, I don't have a problem with that. It's just that none of that happens here. And this happens again and again in the story. Like, the main character will suddenly just have these abilities and these skills and be doing these things that I'm like, where did this come from? None of this is explained. You're just giving me names of stuff and you're not telling me how he got them or like what they actually do. You know what I mean? And that happens throughout this entire story. And that's just on the game mechanic side. There are a lot of other issues here. Like, there are some of the abilities, again, just feel like they're made up. And some of the mechanics as well. For example, in another scene, the main character and his group are sneaking around. They're trying to get somebody out of jail. And one of the characters says, why don't we just knock out one of the guards and take his uniform? And the main character's response is, oh, that's not allowed in the game. How? I don't know. The main character never explains how he knows it. He just does. And then like they continue on sneaking through this place, even though none of them have that skill. So it's like at the same time, one, the main character has foreknowledge of a system that he's just starting to learn. And two, he's already contradicting himself in that he's saying you have to have a skill to do this thing, but this other thing we're doing all together, even though we're warriors, we don't have to have a skill for necessarily. You know what I mean? And so there's a conflict of even like those kind of fundamental rules to the game world, and that happens again throughout the entire story quite a bit. I'll go on. I'm going to skip the rest of the game mechanics because it's genuinely a long list. I wrote 2 whole paragraphs in the full review just because it bugged me that much. And again, this is one of the things that's kind of particular to our particular genre of LitRPG, and that the RPG mechanics have to make fundamental sense and they have to make a sense of logic, because the readers are gamers. The readers are gamers who are generally people who look into game mechanic systems because they want to learn them and to do well the game. And so part of their gaming experience is, learning the rules and them making sense. And as long as they make sense and they can see what they can and can't do. And if the rules are always changing, this world suddenly feels unrealistic, if that makes sense to you. You know what I mean? Okay, on the combat side of this thing, it's okay. Like, the descriptions of combat scenes, they're decent. The fights are decently described. They are. On the logic side, again, it's a huge mess, though. Because there is a permadeath aspect to the story, which is described in the novel description. I kind of knew as a reader that no one important was ever going to die. Because if they died, they would die permanently. And in general, most authors don't want to kill their main characters. And while in a fantasy setting or like a general sci-fi setting, that's kind of the default setting, right? But in a video game story, in a LitRPG stories in particular, in games, gamers are used to dying. They really are. Like, every game I've ever played, death has been part of the learning experience. Like, you learn how the game works. You learn how to play it best. You learn how to do different tricks and how to exploit enemies' weaknesses by saving and dying and reloading and playing it all over again, or starting all over from the beginning. Even if you go back to like Super Mario Brothers or Zelda or Ninja Turtles, whatever it is, like, dying is a core part of the gamer experience. And so when permadeath is implemented, it's sort of tricky because, one, you're taking away part of the communal experience that gamers have, and two, you're kind of already saying, these main characters are never going to die, and that kind of shifts the perspective of the story in making it feel less relatable to a gamer's experience above having played games all their life. You know what I mean? So that's. Permadeath is always tricky when you do it. I know Sword Art Online did it, and that kind of set the bar for a lot of things. But in that game, there are special circumstances. But even in those instances, like the reason the main characters and everyone else continues going is that even though people are dying and dying permanently, that's a poor part of the story. Like, characters that you grow to love are murdered and they die permanently. They have a motivation to do so, and that doesn't exist in this story, which is again getting in the story a little bit. So I'm going to move back to combat for a second. Okay. Also, combat is just kind of a mess. Again, let's see what else. It's frustrating when you see that numbers and damage descriptions also say that the main characters and the other characters in the story should have died. An early example of this is that when the main character and his two group members, they face off against a level 10 opponent. The main character at this point is level 3, another member is level 2, and the third member is level 1. So they're fighting somebody who's 3 to 10 times their level, right? And the damage descriptions clearly show that even a casual blow from this powerful enemy taking off like half of the main character's health. And he's the tank of the group. He really is, or he's tankish. Yet at some point in this particular action scene, the level 1 guy, he tackles the level 10 dude to the ground, and then he takes repeated blows from him to his head, and yet he never dies or even really seems injured. And so it's these kind of, again, inconsistencies in the stories and the game mechanics, as opposed to like, oh, just writing a fun interesting action scene, that conflict and that make, again, the story seem unrealistic and even breaking its own rules. It makes the victories and the combat scenes in the story feel like magical, wand-wavy kind of things. And I feel like it makes me feel like they're not really grounded in a real game mechanic system, which again kind of ruins the story for, at least for me, and for a lot of other readers, I think it would as well. Story-wise, again, the premise is a direct pull from Sword Art Online. Day 1 login, everyone is trapped in the game, and if they die in the game, they die in real life. That's not spoilery, it's in the novel description. Again, however, unlike Sword Art Online, there's no real clear definition of how these characters can leave the game. In Sword Art Online, it's part of the premise that, oh, if you beat the bad guy, if you beat the Reaper guy, whoever's at this particular level, everybody gets freed, right? So that there's everyone's motivation to risk their lives and continue to fight, even though people do die in that storyline. And not everybody even goes for a lot of players in that particular story decide, oh, we're going to stay in the towns because we're scared of dying. And so it's only the elite few gamers that go forth and try to conquer the game to free everybody in Sword Art Online. In this particular story, there's less of that. Like, there's no clear motivation for anybody to leave the city because nobody knows how to get out. It's never really like given as a goal. And so when everybody's just, and I mean everybody still goes out and fights and kills and quests and levels and even player versus player stuff. And like, there's a fundamental flaw in like the reasoning of why they do it. And I would be okay with it if it was, if there was like some motivational explanation for it. Like, oh, we're all going to band together to figure it out. That's never explained. It's just everybody goes out and does it. So I'm like, that is story wise, there are just issues for me, at least, as far as like empathizing with character motivation, understanding why this story exists, as far as like, why is everybody doing this thing? So I had issues with it. Now, story wise, after that particular premise is set up, the main character essentially goes on a slice of life adventure, killing bad guys, collecting other players to join him on his journey, leveling, and getting never before mentioned game powers. And again, that's part of the game mechanic thing, just kind of being made up as it goes along. Other big issues in the story include inconsistent motivations and reactions from characters, which I touched on a little bit. There's a lot more to it than that. Feel free to read the full review. Also issues of like the main character having foreknowledge that he should not have, knowing things essentially that he shouldn't, like things about the game world, things about the powers of other characters that he's never seen before, like knowing their names and knowing what they do and describing them to the reader. It's like, oh, wait, how do you know that? Like, you shouldn't know that. And he shouldn't, which is one of those things that kind of bugs me. Additionally, just like, I never cared about the character. Like, Adam, even though there's a setup at the beginning where like he does, there's a little bit of extra for him, like why he's playing this game. Other than that, I never really understand who the character is and understand what flaws he has that make him relatable, make him human, and make room for him to grow as a character. None of that really exists in the story, so it really made it hard for me to root for him as a character. Like he's not a bad person, but it's never along like he's kind of too perfectly made. Like he never loses. He beats all the bad guys. Personality wise, he's just kind of blah. Like he's automatically a leader, which he's not in real life. And so that shifting character personality, I should say, is never explained. And so it's like, it was hard for me to like want to see this character succeed or really care if he fails or not. You know what I mean? Like his familiar, his pet that he eventually gets, he kind of had more personality than the main character, and I liked him more, which is not a good sign for your story. Overall, I just couldn't like the story. I'm like I said, at the core of it, I think there is potential. It's just like all these problems exist that I just couldn't ignore. And even without those problems, like the story as it is written now, it's just kind of like, okay, it's not horrible by itself. But with the problems, it was just so frustrating to read. Like I had pages and pages of notes on like every single percent of the story, like, oh, problem here. Why is this happening? This doesn't make sense. Again and again, just in the story. And it's just so frustrating for me. There are some interesting characters in the novel. There are some interesting story moments, but they're all the good things in this novel are really heavily overshadowed by all the problems, at least for me, and the errors in the story. So for me, I just couldn't enjoy it. It's a score of 4 out of 10. The Slayer, a LitRPG Saga, Aether Online, book number 1, with again a score of 4 out of 10. There you go. Okay. On to the next story. It is Killstreak, book number 1, Respawn, an epic fantasy lit RPG. It is written by Stuart Thaman. Thaman. Okay. It is 280 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Lord Cataract's Darkhour was born on Earth, but in Aglor, he's the highest level assassin anyone can find. The leader of the famed Blackened Blades, he's made a name for himself, built a kingdom of sorts, and only had to respawn once along the way. Then a rogue band of jackals sends him all the way back to level 1 in a dreary tavern in a tiny village to start over. Hellbent on revenge, Cataract sets out on a path littered with bodies, level up, find the jackals, and slay their god. So there you go. Okay, this is again, 282 pages, $3.09, available on Kindle Unlimited. It's actually a decent enough action story. If you just want something that's very actiony, this is probably going to do it for you. But there's not really a lot else to it. There are RPG mechanics that assist the story, and there is some originality with specific stats and the class of the main character that he chooses. It's just when I saw that there was going to be a different main character or a different class than you normally see, I got kind of excited about it, and it ended up not being as interesting as I thought it was going to be. The entire story kind of turns around like, the main character dying and choosing a new class. And when it's that kind of story, I just kind of expected, I guess, that this would be like a super amazing class. There'd be a bunch of great new abilities I'd never seen before, used in a variety of different and interesting ways. And it wasn't. It felt a little more standard. Like, I could have replaced the class name the main character chooses here with something else I've seen before in other RPG games. So I was like, it's again not bad. It's just like, okay, that's not as interesting as I thought it was going to be. After the story kind of amounts to the main character fighting, doing some slice of life adventuring, picking new powers, which are fairly standard for most of them, and as he levels, and that's kind of it. So if that's what you're good at, if that's all you want from the story, like I said, the strong suit in the story is definitely the action. Great. For me, it kind of, the story was hard for me to invest in because I had a hard time connecting with any of the characters. For example, the main character, when he's introduced to us at the beginning of the story, he's super powerful. Like he's like level 70 something. And when the average level for like NPCs are like 2. You know what I mean? So he's already super powerful. And even though he starts again at level 1 when he dies, which is a mechanic in the story, he still existed in this world for decades. And we only get like a small part of that background information and history on him. And that's spread out through the entire novel. So it was really hard for me to like understand who the character was, what his motivations are, and empathize with him enough to like feel like I'm part of the story. The story, again, tries to build around the beginning action scene, and where like he's facing off against these, they call them hyenas, but essentially they're gnolls, and the dark god that they summon that kills the main character. Like everything tried to build like, making a character back to him, getting him strong enough to beat them all, that god or that summon god, whatever. But instead the story just kind of feels like it's slice of life meandering, which is not bad. It's just like, that's not what I was expecting. It's so maybe part of the part that I didn't quite enjoy the story is like my expectations were different or set up differently than they were actually executed in the novel. That could be it. But again, not connecting with the main character was kind of a part of the story that I couldn't connect with it. Though again, there's also an attempt to build tension in this story, but again, it's kind of difficult because there are no real consequences for anybody's actions, good or bad. It is a core mechanic in the story that when anybody dies, whether they're the Earthworm players or natives to the world, they are reborn. Or not reborn, they respawn rather in some other randomly location on the globe, and they just restart at level 1. So they retain all their memories of their existence in the game world. Their appearance doesn't change. They just lose their class and all those skills and all the like associated memories, or like I should say like. I forget the word is, like when your body knows to do something and it's automatic, like those kind of trained skill reflexes, they lose all that for their class. So if you were a sword wielding warrior in your past life and you chose to be a mage in your second level, in your second reincarnation or respawn or whatever, then you lose all those class abilities and all those class skills for your warrior set. You don't just get to keep them and carry them over. And so there's a little bit of balance on the game mechanic side. But what that ultimately ends up doing is that making anything you did in life not permanent, and that there are no real permanent consequences for actions. Because there are several examples of this in the story. Like the main character in the life he started at the beginning of the story is an assassin. He's murdered lots of people, did it for money, killed plenty of bad guys, right? But when he's reborn, or when he's like respawn, I keep saying reborn for some reason. When he respawns, all that was forgiven. All the horrible things he did were just forgiven by like the story's like main peacekeeping group, right? And instead he's able to like work with them to solve the problem and try to beat the bad guy. But it was kind of a reflection, like, oh, so like anything the main character does in this particular story doesn't really matter. The author can just kill him and he'll start off somewhere else randomly and just be able to live his life without consequence. And so as a fundamental conflict of the story, that kind of made the decisions made in the story kind of less impactful, at least for me. So it's just one of those things. Overall, again, the writing isn't bad. There's really nothing bad about the story. I just didn't connect with the characters, and the RPG world on itself just wasn't interesting enough to engage me fully. So for me, again, it's again not a bad story, not even boring. It just didn't hit good for me, and so it gets a score of 6 out of 10. For me. That's Killstreak, book number 1, Respawn, an epic fantasy LitRPG with a score of 6 out of 10. But again, very action-oriented, very action-focused, and that the action's done well. So if you want an action story, and you can overlook those things that bother me, you might actually enjoy this. So go give it a try if you're one of those people. Okay, next we have Loki's Daughter, the Opal Dungeon, a LitRPG novel, Tales of Opal Dungeons, book number 1, written by Marty Myers. It is 311 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Alex Washington will be tried and tested as never before as she suffers under the cruel torture of the gods in order to earn a chance to escape and outlive the eradication of humanity. Her one chance comes at the hands of Loki, who offers her a devil's bargain if there ever was one. Become a dungeon and grow strong enough to help him escape the unending torment imposed by the gods of Asgard, and in return, she will live and have a chance to get payback on those who have wiped out humanity. So there you go. Okay, I should warn you in advance, there are noticeable and fairly regular technical writing errors to the story. Small things like missing punctuation marks, like periods, commas, question marks, parentheses, quotation marks, things like that. There are also mixed tenses in the story. So it'd be like past tense and present tense in the same sentence. There's misspelled or just missing words entirely. A bunch of like little things like that. It didn't really bother me overall, but I know that it really does bother a lot of people. Like my brain, after a while, it'll just like ignore it as I'm reading. So I don't personally have an issue with it, but it was noticeable enough for even me to notice. So I would say always go check out a sample. And in these cases, just because if you're one of those people and it's going to bother you, it's really going to bother you. Okay. Overall, the novel can be divided into 2 parts, with the split occurring at about the 50% mark. This first part of the story actually did like a really good job. Like I would say the first 3% of this novel is great. Like it really is. Like it's the setup for the story is it genuinely is like, oh, this is kind of impressive. And I think in part for me, it's that I write LitRPG as well. And I'm like, my setups take such a long time because I'm such a wordy author that when someone can do it in like 2 or 3% of their story, like the first 2 or 3%, and set up MP for the characters, set up background, set up motivation, and do some game rule explanations, I'm kind of impressed. And so that's kind of what happened here. So that, like I said, the first 2 or 3% of the novel, really well done. Kudos to the author. Like it really does, like it sets up the world, why it's ending, the main character, you get background on her history, who she is, what motivates her as a person, why she's doing the things she does. I'm like, oh, and it's done super efficiently. So just to note, good job there. The rest of the story didn't impress me as much, but I'll get into that. Again, the first part of the story is mostly set up for like a lot of the things, including like RPG rules, explains the magic system, summoning the evolution of monsters, and a lot of it's creating the dungeon stuff. And there's a little bit of action there in the first half, but it's mostly the main character and like the side characters establishing themselves and building the dungeon, setting it up. And it just goes on way too long for me, without any kind of action breaking up that dungeon creation part or doing any dungeon things. Like really when the first 50% of your story is essentially, I'm going to say like 90% dungeon creation and not dungeon diving, it can kind of be a little too much. It's in the second half of the story where all the action is. Like essentially everything the dungeon is created in the first half, and then the last, like, what is it, 250 pages basically, is all dungeon dive. So the novel is very clearly divided into dungeon building, dungeon diving. And that's kind of a problem for me, in that if you love dungeon building stuff, great. And if you love action stuff, maybe just read the back end. But because there's not a balanced mix of it, it's very easy to get overwhelmed and kind of get bored with just the dungeon creation stuff. You know what I mean? So like in general, I always find it, the stories I like the most in this particular subgenre is that they do dungeon creation, dungeon building, someone dungeon dives, shows some flaws, maybe beats some stuff, or they die and the dungeon gets some more experience points or some powers to like expand the dungeon, and then you go do more dungeon building. So it switches off where there's a reason for progression, and there's resources for more progression, proven out by like, oh, adventurers coming in and either beating your dungeon or being killed by it, you know what I mean? And so the stories that I've liked the best have kind of done a better mixing of the two, and not just like the whole first half is dungeon building and the whole second half is a dungeon dive by a particular group, you know what I mean? So for me, that was kind of where it lost me. But again, in their own rights, these two sections aren't poorly written. The dungeon building stuff is decent. Like, it's not particularly thorough. I have some issues personally with some of the game mechanics that the author uses. Like, some of the evolutions don't make consistent sense. Like, there's a whole series of monsters. A lot of this is underwater level stuff. But the number of transformations don't occur. Like, for example, there's a bat that's taken over by the dungeon, and within one evolution becomes like a humanoid vampire. Right? Not horrible. I mean, if that was how all the monsters evolve, great. But it's not. Like, there are fish and other like sea life creatures that take like 5 or 6 evolutions to get to that humanoid form. So you see, like, there's definitely there's not a consistency in some of the game mechanics. But like, so that's a minor thing. Didn't ruin anything for me. It's just like, oh, a thing to notice. But again, in their own rights, like in these different sections, they're decently well written. So the only problem I kind of had was that, again, there's not a good distribution of fight scenes or dungeon diving scenes to break up that dungeon building stuff. And so it felt like it was just a bad mixing proportion. And so this is the story for me. It's just a little bit shy of good. Like I said, I really thought the first 3% was great. Like, I really enjoyed that. And it made me care for the main character and all that good stuff. It's just that the rest of the story is just like, oh, it's kind of like one thing at a time. And it's like one note for the first 50%, and then a different note for the second half. And I just wish there was a better mix between that. I would have enjoyed the story just a little bit more, and it would have got a better score for me. That's it. For me, it gets a score of 6 out of 10. Again, just kind of shy of being good for me because of that, just like that unproportionate mixing of the two. Loki's Daughter, The Opal Dungeon, a LitRPG novel, Tales of Opal Dungeon, book number 1, with the score of 6 out of 10. That's it. Okay, last one. Fortress of Shadows, a LitRPG and GameLit adventure, Stonehaven League, book number 2, written by Carrie Summers. It is 294 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. A giant telepathic parrot with a rather foul mouth, a horde of smelly goblins, and a tyrannical demon priestess. Welcome to Devon Walker's new normal. During her first weeks in the deeply immersive VR game Relic Online, she's hacked out a home from a choking jungle, gathered a tribe of loyal followers, and earned a wisp stalker who insists she's some kind of champion. But Relic Online isn't some wussy kids game, and there will be no easy street cruising for Devon. Like a monk racking up combo points, the system opens up a fresh offensive by crippling her most powerful ability. Following through, it strangles the village food supply, sends demons bursting from rifts in the earth, and delivers a final devastating throat punch by exploiting Devon's worst fear. The players have discovered Devon's home. Now, everything changes. So there we go. That's the author's description. Very well done. Lots of cool hints about the story. Without spoiling anything, so I'll try to follow up in the same vein. Overall, this is a good book. It is. It's in more. It builds on the foundation that book one set, and I actually like this book more than book one. And book one I already liked. The book two in the series actually improves on book one. It fixes a few of the flaws I personally saw in book one. There are a few more in here. Nothing's perfect, of course. But overall, this was an improvement on an already good story for me. This story felt more focused. From like the very first page of the story, I was kind of aware of where the story was going to go. And while the destination was known, the trip there was still very entertaining, and it had some nice surprises along the way. The story advances well, both in the in-game story plot and also in the real-life storyline. It was pleasant. I was pleasantly surprised to see some of the things set up in book one paid off here, especially with some of the players that were introduced in book one. There's a comeback for some of them, and there's some good emotional resolution with them in this story. So kudos to the author. Game mechanic wise, it's relatively the same. There's some good advancement for the main character's abilities and levels, and some new interesting classes described, because again, you got new players coming in with some unique classes. So it's kind of nice to see some other character development stuff there. There's more village development, more village building stuff here, and in addition to like a logical food management issue. So I thought it was a nice touch to creating a resource management side of the story and the game mechanics. Death in this particular book is a little more frequent for the main character than it was for book one, and it's used as a learning experience, which is one of those things I saw in book one. Is like, oh, why doesn't this character die more? It doesn't make sense. And in this book, she totally dies more, and it makes sense why. And it kind of, for me at least, was an improvement, because again, the gamer experience when you're playing video games is that you die, and you die a lot generally, especially if you're bad at the game, but you learn from it. You get better. You learn the game mechanics. You learn how to use the controls, what buttons do what combos are effective, which ones aren't against whatever enemies, right? It's a learning experience when you die, and that feels like it exists more in book two than it was in book one. And there are story reasons why there's a shift. I just thought it was something to know that, oh, that's an improvement, at least for me, because it makes the game more relatable. It makes me feel like, oh, the main character's not always guaranteed to win. And that at least created the illusion of tension for me. Like, oh, is she going to beat this guy? Is the group going to win here? Because now there's the possibility that they won't. And that same feeling didn't exist necessarily in book one. And that was one of those things like, oh, that can maybe be improvement. And the author totally did. So good for you. Good for her, I should say. One of the few things that I will gripe about it in this particular story was that there are a few new abilities that are shown off. And they felt a little wand waving, that they were super specific. And I was like, as soon as I read them, I was like, oh, this ability seems really, really specific in what it can do and what its qualifiers are. I bet you it's going to be used to solve a problem later. And it was. It happened a couple of times. I was like, oh, okay. So that was just, it's one of those things in storytelling. You have to create problems for the character to solve. And by some power, she has to be able to solve them, him or her. And that's just how the author chose to do it in this particular case. And again, not anything that ruins the story. It's just like, oh yeah, you kind of see that coming. When a main character gets this really specific power, it's like, that's probably going to be a key to a problem later. And it was in several instances. So, but like I said, tiny thing, didn't ruin the story. It's just like, oh, okay. Overall, good story again. Then again, that improves on already a good series. I had a good time with it. Gets a score of 7.6 out of 10 for me. That's Fortress of Shadows, a LitRPG GameLit adventure, Stonehaven League, book number 1, with the score of 7.6 out of 10. So there you go. Had a good time with him. And that's it. We're done. We're finished. It's, again, a relatively shorter episode. Thank you very much for hanging out and for listening and for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, and before I forget, on the issue of the background stuff, overwhelmingly those votes came in and almost everybody liked the library background. So that's what we're going to be using from now on. I may shift out the different library backgrounds just to see which one is the most enjoyable, most clear, and most affordable to purchase as an actual licensed product. But there we go. We're all finished. Thanks a lot for hanging out with me. Remember, if you want to support the podcast, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Patreon, our webpage. There are plenty of ways to support the podcast, including just when you buy your books, use our affiliate links that we have in the show notes. We'll get a couple pennies for every purchase you make, but those pennies add up and they help to fund this podcast and make it, keep it a free, ad-free experience for everybody. So there you go. So thanks again for hanging out with me, ladies and gentlemen. If you until we can hang out again, folks, though, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.